right, let's get going. Actually, there's a piece of paper in the front here. If you could just pass that around, make sure everybody signs in. You capture the people that are online as well?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Introductions. I am Bill Hammond. I'm on the product management team. What you're about to go through for the next 90 minutes is just something that developed is we're bringing people on board. We wanted to help them understand the marketplace. This is, sorry into this. It's not product training. You're not going to leave here knowing how to operate Relativity or become competent to go run an e-discovery case. What you are going to leave hopefully with is a better knowledge of both what happens in a normal e-discovery process from beginning to the point where somebody's in court talking to a judge, and also which of our products get used at which phase along that whole journey. So it's really about how our products fit into the marketplace, who uses them, things like that. So we won't be diving into a lot of product stuff. I will kind of jump into things like our product does this really well, and that's why people love it. Our product doesn't do this, some other ones do. So I'll be honest about where we play really well and where we have areas that we still need to shore up. So hopefully you'll leave here with a little better understanding. Does anybody in the room have e-discovery experience? All right. Try to stay with me. This, you might know. And feel free, by the way, to chime in. If I'm saying something you want to amplify, it works better if everybody in the room is kind of engaged and asking me questions. And so if you run into anything that you think we could clarify, let me know. Okay, so how we're using them in e-discovery. I kind of frame it around for each of the products, the history, because some of our products we developed in-house. Some of them we actually acquired a company or a technology. I think that's interesting to know kind of where the products came from, who they're for. Touch on the marketing messages because I think that's important to understand. Generally, if you boil down what the company's saying about the product, not just us, but any company, you'll understand what it does well and why they think it's different than their competitors. So our marketing messaging, I think, is worth looking at for that. And we will end, by the way, with the Relativity 1, which is our software as a service or SaaS play as well. Not a ton of content to go through there, but I want to make sure we cover it. Okay, who's in the room has seen this thing before? I know my e-discovery professionals have. Oh, lovely. Okay, EDRM. And this is the roadmap of how an e-discovery case kind of flows through. They call it a data model. But essentially, these are all the things that happen in this broad spectrum of what we call e-discovery. It's a little complex. It's a little arrows here, could go there, multi-threaded in certain places. So as we kind of look at this whole market, we sort of flatten it out and simplify it a little bit. So this is kind of those same boxes in a more linear way of looking at them. And to be honest, the other way has a lot of, the other view of it has a lot of value in terms, because things don't typically go 100% start to finish without looping back or doing another step again, things like that. So, but for the process of explaining what's going on here, it kind of works better to just think of it this way. The products above, those are all our different products and where they kind of fit along that continuum. You'll see some of them line up pretty clearly with a particular product. Some of them kind of span products. So it's not a clean like product aligns to this box. Legal hold collection work well. Processing kind of spans a few. EC and investigation does. So that's the way the products kind of line up along this e-discovery process. Put this chart up there because I want you to realize, probably if nothing else, the goal of moving left to right on that chart you just saw is reducing the number of documents. Almost at every stage, I'll be talking about how you can use our products or what the people that are using the product are trying to accomplish. The fewer products that get all the way through to review and ultimately to the case, the better for those people at the end of the case. The most expensive part of e-discovery is review. You got a human, a lawyer, who makes hundreds of dollars an hour reading a document. The more that you can filter out junk that they don't have to read the fantasy football emails or, hey, let's get to dinner tomorrow night, and they take them just as long to read that document. If you can give them what you think are the more high-quality documents and you filter those out during some of these other stages I'll talk about, that's important goal of e-discovery. These are the different people that we consider our users. This is a combination, frankly, of users and buyers. Some of these people are, when you look at personas or target customers, there's usually a set of user personas, people that use your product, buyer personas, people that are involved in the decision making, and there's usually overlap. So this is kind of the overlap, but somebody that might be a person that you would think, like, okay, in-house counsel, for example. They might be using our products, but you can bet they were involved in the financial decision to decide to spend the money or not because it's coming out of their budget. So people play both roles. I'm not going to go over these in tons of detail. I do want to point out just a couple of quick ones, though. The litigation support professional has historically been our sweet spot as far as a customer. If you looked at our customer base and looked at all the people's names we have, some form of litigation support professional is probably the more frequent title than anything else you'll see. We have been adding more corporate people, so like executives, information security professionals, IT infrastructure people. We actually have stories and important things that we do for those personas as well. The reviewer, that's that lawyer I just talked about that sits there reading documents. So all these people are involved or visible to us as part of our selling process. Depending on which product we're selling, it might be a smaller subset of these. But what I want you to do, homework, when you leave here, if you go on our Einstein page, everybody's probably gotten exposed to Einstein, our intranet page, just go on there and search for personas, because what you'll find is a page that blows up those short little descriptions I had into very long, detailed information about what does this person care about, what are the kind of things that they get evaluated on, what are the kind of messages that we use to talk to these people. If you're interested in who Kate Kira and Relativity sells to, those are the people, and everything you want to know is in these. So Einstein page, search for personas, and you can look at each one of these and read through it. It'll give you a great overview of who our customers are. Okay, so now we're going to get into the product and marketplace space stuff with a area that we don't have a product in. Information governance. This is a term that's been thrown around the industry for a while. There's no one definition of what it really means, but fundamentally, if e-discovery is a process that kind of kicks in when you think you've got some litigation that's going to result, information governance is, and that's kind of a reactive way of looking at it, right? So information governance is actually proactive. It's establishing policies and procedures about your data and the retention or deletion of that data prior to any e-discovery process. And it's really all about managing corporate risk. The idea is if I can have policies and procedures in place that will limit the amount of data that can be discovered, the likelihood that something is a smoking gun in there would theoretically go down. Plus the fact that it makes e-discovery way more efficient if you just don't have a ton of junk. So information governance is kind of the first stage of e-discovery. Is sort of an evolving process. It's way more about today workflows than a specific product. So what I mean by that is companies will determine their data retention policies and how long they're going to keep copies of emails and how long the backup of any systems are going to be. There's rules they have to abide by. It's not the wild, wild west. You do have restrictions on contracts. You can't just get rid of contracts the day after you sign them. You need to keep those around. You can't blow up your tax returns and say, all right, we don't have them anymore. So there are documents and types of documents that there are higher level restrictions on. But you can do things with like employee email. After a certain point in time, you could just say we don't keep employee emails after 6 months or a year or whatever it is. I know I've been here 4 years and I have 4-year-old emails sitting in my email box. I'm sure I do. Hopefully there's no smoking gun in there in any discovery situation. But most of what's going on here with information governance is simply the IT group largely, or the information security group. How many people have heard the phrase security bill yet? It's not me. Okay. So security bill would be the guy in our company that's concerned about those kind of things. He'd be working with David Hanna, our inside counsel, about legal issues and whatever. But that's the kind of role in the company that would be concerned about this to start an information governance project or set of rules. But again, it's not a product you install and say, we're doing information governance. It's more of a loose set of policies and procedures that you ask your employees to abide by or that you enforce by. I've heard of companies actually, it's not like, hey, please delete your emails after 6 months. It's your emails are gone after 6 months. So it's an interesting thing because we will push into this market. There's no Relativity IG product right now, but there are capabilities of our existing products that actually play very well in here when you talk about workflows. So it's something we've got our eye on. Some of our competitors play, but most of them, again, it's not a product thing. It's much more about workflows. Okay, so now we start to get into the actual products that Kcura offers in the Relativity suite of products. The first one is Legal Hold. Historically, Legal Hold was a product that we built internally. It was the first product that Kcura built outside of Relativity. You guys have probably all heard of Relativity as a platform. You can extend it. You can build applications on top of it. That's all absolutely true, and the first iteration of our Legal Hold product was something that we said, well, let's do it ourselves. And we built a product called Method. You probably haven't heard of it. Most of our customers hadn't either. It wasn't wildly successful. We had a few customers, but it was a great example of software company. You'll see this 100 times if you look at 100 companies, that you start a product, you think you've got a market or a niche or something your customers want, and then you build it and you get it out in front of customers and you find out, yeah, not quite. And that's sort of the story of Method. A couple of things were problematic with it. Our Relativity users are in Relativity all day, every day. They get used to it. Any little weird quirk's not a weird quirk to them. It's the way I work. Legal Hold, the user is typically somebody in the corporate legal department, maybe at a law firm, but usually it's inside the corporation. They don't get sued. No, I shouldn't say that. A few companies get sued every day, but not every company gets sued every day. So you've got these more infrequent, casual users who want to engage with a product and have a very defined workflow. I remember how to do this. You're not asking me a bunch of questions I don't know the answers to. We kind of built our first Legal Hold product, Method, for a user that was more like our Relativity user. So people might use it once, but then they came back to it 3 weeks, a month later, and it's like, what am I doing? It was just very hard to use. That was one problem. The other problem was we were very new at trying to get to the corporate buyer at that point. The legal departments, or the law firms and our partners, their PHPs, which stands for Premium Hosting Partner, or LSPs, Legal Service Provider. Those are people that offer Relativity. They take Relativity from us and they offer it to other customers. Those people were very used to the Relativity piece of things. But the problem with the way that corporate looks at this, the whole matter, their whole called the universe of all the matters they've got, they're very person or custodian centric. What I mean by that is most of the times that the corporate user goes into that situation looking at who's involved. So they kind of want to start with who are the people that are involved in this. Relativity by its very nature is matter-centric or case-centric. So the first entry into the interface was to us, it was, I should make it all the cases that are involved. And the users came back to us and said, what I really want to know is a place I can pick the users. I want to see what cases they're involved in. So it's customer or employee-centric versus looking at it like a law firm would, which is matter-centric. So we got that wrong. So we came out with a couple of different versions of Legal Hold, starting to address a lot of the stuff I just talked about. And then when it really kind of got to the point of critical mass was its third iteration. And it was right at the time that we started to talk about this complete end-to-end e-discovery suite. And we realized we really wanted to leverage the Relativity brand across that. So we rebranded a product called Method to Relativity Legal Hold. So that's where it came from. It's an internally developed product. We built it in-house. We learned all those ugly lessons by, getting a bloody nose, but we did it. Critical point here to point out, the phrase discovery has existed forever. We've had to discover documents forever. This is not new. What we're doing with the Relativity and this whole review process, all it's really changing is documents are electronic, which in some ways makes our lives a lot easier because you don't have to take physical copies and take physical documents and make copies and send those around. You can do it all electronically, which sounds awesome. The problem is e-discovery made creating documents so much easier than it used to be. Not e-discovery, but computers made creating those documents. So the document counts have just exploded exponentially. It used to be unheard of to have, a million documents in a lawsuit. Now it's kind of table stakes. So the challenge with e-discovery wasn't one of, it's this new process. We have a process for discovery. You're looking at documents, trying to decide if they're relevant or not to the case. E-discovery just made it more challenging because of the scale and the scope that it brought to it. Now all of a sudden you were dealing with way, way more documents. By the way, parenthetically, before I started at K-Cura, I was in the middle of a lawsuit. It had nothing to do with this place. It was a different thing. It was my old job, but I went through this process. So it was really interesting when I came here to understand a lot more about what's going on, like behind the scenes and why I was being put through a lot of what I was being put through. The 7.5-hour deposition was one of the worst days of my life. And I didn't do anything wrong. I never dropped from lawsuit. It wasn't like I was, but it's grueling. This process is grueling. So just as I inject a few things here and there, it might be because of my own experience. What's a custodian? So I just want to define this because we talk about custodians for a lot of the rest of the product. Custodian's nothing more than somebody who has documents that need to be part of this process. It's just another name for the employee or the litigant or whatever you want to call them. A custodian is somebody that is the custodian of documents that you're going to have to look at and review. Legal hold. Does anybody know when a legal hold is supposed to start?
As soon as you know you're being sued.
That's a really good answer. It's actually a little before that.
As soon as you know you might be sued.
Exactly. As soon as you have a reasonable expectation that litigation may result or something like that, the lawyer way of phrasing that. But that's interesting because, once you know that you're doing something that potentially somebody could sue you for, at that point, the courts have said you're under obligation to begin your legal hold process. So you might not have the papers in hand yet, but the example I kind of use sometimes is, let's say we hired an engineer from another company, gets involved in a project, sees how we're doing it, and knows that his other company had a patent on this particular way that we're solving that problem, and he tells Andrew. Now, Andrew could decide, no, I think it's totally different. But you could argue that Andrew at that point has a reasonable expectation that litigation may result. So you could be in a position where you'd have to start something in a legal hold position that early. This bullet, project management and documentation. What I want to point out here is our legal hold product does not hold anything. It doesn't magically keep the documents from being deleted by somebody. What it does is identify who potentially has documents by kind of casting a wide net and then asking those some questions, and then determining which people might indeed have documents that we need to look at, and letting the other ones kind of off the hook. You take them off legal hold. And then going through a process of maybe another questionnaire or something and identifying those people that you're going to have to take through to the next phase of this whole thing. The benefit and the important differentiator that I want to articulate here about what our legal hold product does, when you execute a legal hold and you have to tell people, look, you could potentially have documents that are relevant to this lawsuit, you can't delete them, you can't change them, you need to hold them, you need to be very clear and repetitive about how you do that. So you've got a very defensible position when the judge asks you, so you went to these people and told them, explain to me what that meant. Were you clear that not, because what you can have is the other side saying, I think there's more documents. When you have a very defined process like we provide with legal hold reporting, you can see who was notified, who responded or acknowledged that notification. That's a very important thing. Just because you said somebody they're on legal hold, it's much more important to have that added to with their acknowledgement. Okay, I get it, I'm on legal hold. And if you can document all this for the court, you're in a much better, more defensible position that you did your legal hold properly and the other side can't challenge your findings or challenge what you collected or looked at. So the project management and documentation is really where the product is gaining its value to our customers. There are products out there that do the hold, and essentially what They integrate with some of the like archiving systems that are out there, and they put a flag on documents and won't allow them to be deleted. It's on our roadmap. It's something we could do. It hasn't been high enough on the list of things that customers want to see that we've done it yet, but I wouldn't be surprised at some point we do actually add that integration with those archiving platforms and say, okay, this document now is literally on hold, and the user couldn't delete it if they wanted to. You might have already gotten here in your head, but the situation is, look, I told you not, it's on legal hold, I told you not to delete anything. What happens if I delete something? Because I know the smoking gun exists in my documents. This doesn't stop you from doing that, but it does limit the corporation's risk. Look, we did everything we could. Now we have a bad actor, Judge. It's not, we didn't do it, that person did it. Just puts you in a different position. So legal hold is really all about documenting a process, repeating it time after time after time. The number one competitor for legal hold is not some other product. It's an admin with a spreadsheet or somebody in the IT group with Outlook folders, and they're trying to keep track of, did the 80 people I told could potentially be on hold, did they all respond with the questionnaire? Did they do it within a certain amount of time? Our product can manage all that for you, and like if you haven't gotten responses from somebody after 5 days, you can have it set up to automatically send out a reminder. 10 days, you can have another reminder sent out that copies their boss, things like that, so you can manage this process. And it generates a ton of reporting, which is maybe all the general counsel, David Hanna in our case, would want to see. Look, how's it progressing? Is everybody notified? Is everybody acknowledged? Okay, we're in good shape. So it's really, again, kind of a project management tool or a process management tool. It's about the process. So how do we talk about it? I've mentioned defensible and repeatable a couple of times. Where we talk about legal hold actually giving you value is a couple of different areas here. Getting started quickly is all about the fact that we have the ability to create, and we actually provide some templates for some of this stuff, like what does a legal hold notification looks like? What does an acknowledgement from the employee look like? And we've got standard documents for that you can obviously customize and use, but you don't have to create these things from scratch. And if you find one you like, you can continue to use it. You don't have to rewrite it every time. The communication piece is kind of what I talked about with the reporting, but all of it, when it says communication here, what it's talking about is the communication from the legal hold owner, kind of the person running this process, to the custodians or those people that potentially have documents, all the responses from the custodians, all the reports that get generated. It's all in one place in the product. You can find out what's going on there very easily. And then the real-time insight is being able to look really at any point in time and say, has anybody not responded yet? Have we gotten the acknowledgements back from everyone? Have we got the legal hold release notices, which are every bit as important here, that you tell somebody, look, okay, we told you were on hold. We've now looked at how you answer the questions. We may have done a personal interview with you, and we've now officially notified you that you're off hold. So all that stuff is made very, very easy within our product. Yeah.
So it's all updated automatically. So when they get that email, it tells tells legal hold they got it, and it's updated. So there's no user input once it's set up.
No. There is a user. It's a good question. There's a good part of the product. It's called the custodian portal, which actually is shared with collection, which I'll get to in a second. So as an employee of the corporation, any tasks I have related to collection or legal hold, I can go to this one place. I have my own dedicated login, and I can see everything I have done. Okay, I acknowledged it on this day, but they sent me a questionnaire here I haven't responded to. So there's always a place that custodian can see that from their own perspective, and obviously then the hold owner can see it for everybody. If these 5 people haven't responded. So, but yeah, it's definitely automated. The user doesn't have to go in and check a box or anything.
Legal hold and collection are going to be my 2 areas. So
good. Okay.
A lot of questions during these 2.
One of the things we realized, nice segue, thank you, was the whole legal hold process is potentially can be very integrated with the collection process, because you're, with legal hold, casting a pretty wide net generally about who could potentially be a custodian, go through the interviews or questionnaires, and then you refine that down to some lower set of people, which means less documents. Remember my graph. So less people, less documents. But then the next thing you need to do at the end of the legal hold process is indeed collect their documents. We have some cool pieces of the architecture really that we can leverage here. Like, remember I mentioned questionnaires that we give to custodians? You can have it set up so that depending on how a custodian answers questionnaires, maybe question 3, 5, and 7, if they answer all 3 of those yes, there's no human that needs to look at their questionnaire. There's no debate that needs to happen between the general counsel and that person. They are on hold. Those are the magic 3. They answered yes to those 3. They were part of the project. They had contact with that other company, and they've been here during that time that the potential infraction happened. If that's the case, boom, they're on. And we can actually kick off a collection job right from that decision point. Okay, you're on hold. Boom, and the next thing that happens is collection kind of kicks in for them, and we go to the next step, which is collection. History. So the history lesson here. Collection is a product that we acquired, I would say we acquired the technology from another company. Everybody heard of our Portland office? That's where our collection product, that was a company that was kind of a startup, and they had some pretty neat technology. Before they even brought it all the way to market, we actually purchased them, and then they spent the first 6 months or so of their life as Kcurians adapting their product, their collection product, to become a relativity application. So it could live within the relativity environment, and it did all the technology changes that it was required to make it just a seamless part and do the things like integrate with legal hold. And in a minute, I'll tell you how it integrates with the next step, which is processing. So it was a product that I would call it a technology we bought. However, we bought not only the technology, but we kept that office open and kept the engineers on staff that had built this product. So we acquired technology and people as part of the acquisition of that company. And that's what even today collection is done. The product development is done out of our Portland office. The objective is, now that I've identified you, Mr. Custodian, as potentially a person whose documents would be relevant in this matter, we've identified that we're going to need to get your documents. So what does get your documents mean? In my case, what it meant was I had to have my laptop connected to the corporate internet or the corporate network. And there was some product that was running in our back office somewhere, data center, and it was just sucking the data off my machine. I fully knew what was happening. I knew they were collecting it. They weren't, in my case, weren't filtering it all. They grabbed the entirety of my C drive or whatever that I had in my laptop. But that's essentially the process that you have to go with collection. It's a pretty simple concept to understand. I got to get these documents so I can have somebody potentially look at them later. There are tons of challenges. So the challenges are around things like location. I'll use my last company. We were much more distributed than Kcure is. You may not know, but most, if not all, of our salespeople are right here in this office, even though we cover really all of the North American market from this office. My last company had those people embedded in those marketplaces. There's a guy in Salt Lake, and there's another guy in San Diego, and yada, yada, yada. So imagine the reaction if I'm a sales rep chasing a quota, and I have to get my data collected because this was a marketing document that was sent to me at some point in time. Yeah, that's where I got involved. It was a marketing document I sent out. But it could exist on these people's laptops, and what the other company was concerned about was, who did you share this with? So all of the salespeople got, their data needed to be collected. But imagine their reaction if you tell them, you know what, you're going to have to send your laptop in. We're gonna, we'll FedEx it back and forth, but you're going to be missing it for the better part of a week, no matter how fast we do this. Not going to react real well to that because it's going to interrupt their day and their week. So being able to be where all the data is a challenge with collection. The diversity of data. When you collect data in this case, you're not just making a copy of someone's hard drive or files on their hard drive. Because to do that, you reset all the what's called metadata. And metadata is just data about data. So simplifying it, if it's a Word document, who created it, when was it created, when was it last edited, all that kind of stuff that is tracked as part of the document, that's the metadata about that document, which is tremendously relevant potentially in a lawsuit. So if you were just to make copies of people's stuff the way you normally make copies, all that stuff gets reset and changed. Not all of it, but a lot of it does. If it's an email,
who was it sent to, when was it sent, when was it opened. Those are the kind of things that are called metadata. So what we need to do is collect the data in a way that preserves all of that data about the data. So in order to do that, you need to understand the file formats. And collecting an email that was on an Exchange system or Outlook is way different than an email that's coming from Gmail or an email that's coming from Lotus Notes. And you need to understand the format and how those files are handled in order to do the correct collection. So it's a pretty complex problem to solve. So the different data types and all the diversity of the data you see, our collection product has challenges to make sure that it's going to cover the broad swath of data that's out there. There are going to be weird data sets, internally developed applications that may have to be collected, things that we would never know. I'll talk about that in a minute, how we handle those, but that's a big challenge. Disruption, I kind of hit on this for that salesperson example, but even if it was me during that time I was getting my data collected, I couldn't do anything on my laptop. They basically had taken remote control of it. So for the better part of a day, because it took about that long for them to get it up and running, I was out of pocket as far as being able to do anything, which isn't great for the employees. Visibility. This one is one, honestly, that when we were initially starting the marketing around this, we hadn't really risen this to the top as an issue, but what we heard is we started to talk to people about, hey, we're going to have this collection product, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. They said one of the big problems they have is they're told, whoever this is, the person doing the collections, told to go collect John Doe's data. Great, but when I go to do I find that John Doe's got 1 gigabyte or 500 gigabytes of data? Do I find that he's got tons of images that are part of a medical imaging product, and that's going to be a weird file type to collect? How does he organize his data? Some people are over foldering. I have everything goes in a folder and then I cannot find it. And other people, everything's at the root of their C drive. All their Word documents and PowerPoints, it's just all there, and they search to find everything. So not knowing that is a challenge when you go, okay, go collect the data. Okay, but I have no idea what I'm walking into. So visibility is a big challenge. Touch on a minute here for something called stealth. Remember I said I knew they were collecting my data? What if they didn't want me to know they were collecting my data? What if they had suspected I was doing something wrong and didn't want to flag it yet with me that they were on to me? That's what's called stealth collection. We don't currently do that. It is something that we get asked for a lot from corporations. They say it's not something to use all the time in the collection process, but they do need it periodically, so not having stealth is a bit of a sales disabler. So it is on the roadmap. We've done parts of what we would need to do it, because when we first started the collection process, basically you would know it's running on your machine. There's pretty obvious examples, not the least of which is a file that's being created on your machine that's this collection, this set of collected data. You would see that building. So, we now have the ability to actually create that file remotely, but you still as a user would know if someone's collecting your data. So we don't do stealth data collection yet.
It's like a collection that the custodian doesn't realize it's taking place.
Right. Let's say it's a sexual harassment suit. This person has said, I'm getting these off-color emails coming from this person, and they're, and maybe you don't want to accuse somebody and say so it's those kind of situations, or you don't want to flag that they're having inappropriate communications with a competitor and things like that. So you might want to collect their data without them knowing.
Got it.
So it's not the majority of cases, but it's an important use case. Remember I said that the diversity of data can be a real challenge? What we've engineered since we brought the product out was kind of a publicly available way for somebody to relatively easily create a data connector. So if you've got some homegrown, unique application that you use for your business, and the data in that application or the data that application generates could be relevant in this particular case, you actually can fairly easily build we call them data connector, to that data source and be able to tell it the things like what metadata you need to preserve and all that kind of stuff. So we have the ability to do this. We tell customers fully documented, you can do it yourself if you have IT people that can do this, or that's what our KCD, Kcura Custom Development team will do for you for a price. And generally, if it's a product that, it's just not on something, it's a fairly, maybe it's not a homegrown one-off application, but it's a pretty obscure application we don't run into a lot, very like vertical market specific. Generally, in those cases, if we build it for them, we'll say, here's the price, and we actually are going to retain that IP so we can offer it to other people later, and it affects the price up. We can make it worth their while. So that's what the challenges that we run into with collection are, really around this location, diversity, disruption. So how does our collection product get around this? First of all, the way that a collection job is created, the first step is something we call stealth. I'm sorry, that's not what we call it. We call it scout. So a scout, I can edit the tape. A scout operation is generally the first thing that happens in a collection job. And what that does, remember that person I said was concerned that go collect Joe Blow's data? I don't know what I'm going to run into. Scout basically allows them a window into what that data looks like on that person's machine, and then they can decide how to proceed. The way that Scout operation is kicked off is actually the same way our collection jobs are kicked off. An email gets sent to the custodian, the person who has the data, describing what's going to happen, pretty short, with a link. They click that link, and basically the rights that they have to see whatever they can see on their machine, network drives, USB drives that are plugged in, all the local drives, whatever rights they've got to see those things get inherited by the person sitting back in the data center, the person running the collection operation, and they immediately are presented in a very short period of time, maybe not immediately. They're presented with a view of what that person's computing environment looks like. And it's presented just like Windows Explorer. Folders on the left, files on the right, drill in, expand. And from that interface, now I can see everything that's out there. I can start making decisions to filter out some of the data, what we call a targeted collection. I can collect everything like they did for me. That's, go to the top of the drive, click the top button, and everything is selected. You can do that. But most of the time, that's kind of crazy, because if you think about what's on your machines back at your desks, we have them here, you've probably all got a copy of Word.exe on your machine. Do you think that has any relevance, unless you're Microsoft, do you think that has any relevance to a lawsuit about, trade secrets? Of course it doesn't. And you certainly don't need to collect it 50 times from 50 different custodians. So you can start to filter out data that is clearly not going to be necessary. Most of the time, the collection is going to revolve around, I'll be very Microsoft-centric here and ignore Google Drive and some of these other things, but, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, few other applications, your email, that's the bulk of what people are looking to collect. All that other stuff that's on your machine, you can collect it, you can bring it in, but you're going to either filter out later or you can filter it out now. So the ability to do this, what we call targeted collection, by running Scout first and then building your collection job through Scout and then kicking that off. And by kicking it off, another email is generated to that user. They do the same thing. We're going to collect your data now. They click that button, and the collection job starts and preserves all that metadata and creates a blob of their data that we can then pass through to the next phase of the operation. So the one thing that you might hear about collection is that's self-collection. You can't let people collect their own data. And we have to explain they're not collecting, or at no point in that process did they ever have a decision about, were they ever in control of a decision about what we were going to collect or what we weren't going to collect. We simply had them acknowledge that we were going to collect on their machine and use their rights profile to see what was there to do the collection. But it's not any point where the custodian is determining what's getting collected.
What are the rules around collecting confidential information, like if the data contains PHI or SPI or something like that?
It's a really good question. It happens later in the process. At this point, you would be collecting that data, even though it's social security numbers or whatever, you would be collecting it, and later on we talk about where you can filter some of that stuff out, either automatically, or a lot of that data will get all the way through to the point where the attorney's looking at the document and they will actually redact it. But we'll talk about that. Good question. So how do we talk about collection? What's the important stuff? Smarter targeted collection, that's that Scout operation leading to a smaller collection that I just kind of described. You reduce the scope of the documents. The ability to do this remotely by just sending emails to people, really important. You can also there's some other ways to do it. You can literally take a USB drive or a thumb drive and have the same sort of routine that you're sending an email, that little program, have them plug the USB stick in, and it'll come up, a little routine will run, it'll come up, they click the acknowledgement, and the collection is done to that USB stick. You know, there's other options to the way to do it, but most of it is that email that I talked to you about. But in any way, anyway, even when the data is being collected, they can still be on their machine, they can still be operating and running their business. And if you're a sales rep in Salt Lake City and this is happening, you're not like losing quota attainment time. And then the source coverage. We keep broadening the types of data that we can support. When we first came out, we had a certain set of data that we could collect. We've added to that. We've added SharePoint. We've added Gmail. We've added local and source side exchange, so from your PST files or the files that exist on the server. We just continue to keep adding additional data sources as needed. But actually the pressure is sort of off because we have that API now. We can tell somebody, yeah, we can say yes today, and then maybe we can decide to build it and include it in the product later. Yeah.
Is there currently one built for cell phone collection, or would that be one of the custom?
We don't do it as well as we'd like to do it. We can, you can get records, you know, but then
the Excel file with everything in it.
Yeah, it's something that as we've investigated that, like we're looking at audio video right now as well, being able to like audit a video stream or a YouTube video and actually have a transcript at the same time. So that doesn't exist yet. That's where we're going with that. The one thing we've heard, for example, on some of the social media stuff, is that the attorneys that are reviewing it feel like, you know, I get this transcript of text, but unless I see it in context, unless I see the Twitter feed, unless I see the chat, you know, green bubble, blue bubble, unless I see it in that format, I'm not really reviewing it kind of in its native way. So while we can provide the content right now, the format is what's challenging on a lot of social media.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so collection. Now we've got to the point where we decided this person their data could be important to this lawsuit. We've actually got the data now, theoretically, you know, back at the mothership. And now we need to do a step called processing. This is a really quick thing to explain. It's a really hard thing to do. What processing is really doing is taking all that unstructured data, all those files, the content of the files, as well as the metadata about those files, and getting them in a database, in a structured format that later on, as you'll see, we can sort, filter, run analytics against. So you're basically transforming data from an unstructured collection of files, of loose files, into structured data in a database format that you can start to do some of this more advanced analytics stuff on. That's really what's happening. In order to do that, you have to be able to understand all those different file types, kind of like we talked about with data, with collection. You have to be able to understand that, because what you're doing with processing is understanding what metadata you care about for that particular file type. You're literally opening that file, collecting all that stuff, and putting it in the database where it belongs based on how your database is structured. So the mechanics of it are complex. Probably the most complex thing about it is the speed at which this has to happen. I mentioned before about how big the data sizes get. The data sizes have gotten so big with these e-discovery cases that a lot of times a processing job is not measured in minutes or hours. It's like, this is going to be 3 days, lit 24/7, just running. So the ability to get through this data as fast as possible is really, really important. I'll talk about this a little more as we get into kind of how we talk about our processing thing, because we've got an important message around that. But so that's really what processing is doing, though. It's taking that loose set of files and getting it into a structure that we can then operate on, and we can help facilitate review by popping up the text of the documents and all that kind of stuff. Again, we're not going to get into the guts of that today, but just understand that's what it is. Processing, homegrown. We built processing. However, we acquired technology and a person when we did that. Our processing engine at its core, you might hear the words invariant. We had one of our PHPs that was using this engine to do processing for themselves. It was kind of a home-built application, and that technology, for whatever reason, became available. and this is back in like 2011. And so we acquired that technology, as well as the chief architect of that technology, still with us, Robert Simpson is his name, and spent from the time we acquired it in 2011 till Relativity Fest of 2012 integrating that processing into Relativity. And that was really notable. I know I mentioned that with Legal Hold and with collection, integrating into Relativity. The important thing with processing was all the other processing vendors was a very separate operation. There was a lot of import-export stuff that took time and was painful and complex and error-prone. What we said is, what if we could make this point and click? And that's really what we try to do. Now, I'll tell you the other side of that coin in a minute as I talk a little more about it. But so the history of Relativity, we acquired some software technology and the architect, and then we spent time building it into our product. So literally, this is not a separate, fully developed application. It was code. It was technology that we then took apart and put back together inside of Relativity. Simple concept, challenging execution. I already hit on that. The number of file formats that are out there, this changes, for example, like, okay, I say, you got to know Word documents. I know I've used 10 different versions of Word over the course of using Word at least. So, and we run into that. Sometimes these collections are for data that's pretty old. So you have to understand how to collect data in, Word 6 or, whatever that used to be. So the file format stuff can get really complex because every time that file change, every time Word increments to another version, potentially we have to do work to support that new version, and we want to keep making sure we test against the old version. So there is the truism is we do roll off some things that are way, way, way old at some point, but it's always going to be a challenge to be able to process data with the different kind of file formats that we have. So I want to talk, this is clearly a statement of relativity processing. Other processing vendors, and there are tons of them, would maybe do this differently, but I'll talk you through what we consider the steps in our processing. Now, I'll probably take a little side trip here and just mention, for a long time, Relativity was just a review platform. So we had to rely on other people to do processing. We didn't do it. So getting data into Relativity via this processing step, we had to partner with people like Nuix, people like iPro, people that Andrew now certainly considers, dead center in our competitive landscape. And we still have people that are processing data in those tools and pulling it into Relativity. And we can make a case all day long about how we have a better mousetrap. The reality is these people have built businesses or have built their processes around these other tools and are very reluctant to rip them out and replace them with something. You don't have to, you can't be just as good as or close to as good as. You generally have to be better, or you have to hit them at a time when their contract is up and be cheaper. So that's a big challenge for us with processing. If you look at from the time we introduced processing and look at what we call our attachment rate. Right now, the statistic's a little skewed because about 9 months ago, we started including processing and data grid, another product we'll talk about in a second, as part of the Relativity. You buy Relativity, you get these two things. We were selling them separately before. But our ability to sell processing to a brand new customer that didn't have an existing processing solution was upwards of 70%. 75, 80% of the time, we would say, okay, you're buying Relativity, you should get a processing license too, and we're able to close that deal. Our ability to replace in our big, large PHPs, which is still a huge part of our business, replace what they were currently using was much less effective. We were able to do it. We've had some, and it continues to roll, but ripping and replacing in those partners was harder than we expected it to be. So we learned. Okay, but steps in processing. So here's how it works. So you got the collected data in Relativity. Remember I talked about you got this blob of data from somebody. The first step, and it's an optional step, but we encourage people to do it, it's what we call inventory. And what that really does is take a quick pass over the whole set of data that's in that collected data set. And it's kind of an inch deep, mile wide. I find out how many files I've got. I find out what file types I've got. I find out what domains, email domains are involved in this. I find out the dates of the files. trying to find out. There's like 5 or 6 things that I know. But what I don't know is the content of any of those files. I haven't actually opened the file and looked at what that email said. I know it was an email sent on a certain date from Gmail, but I don't know anything about it. So it looks like a limited set of information. However, back to my graph, you're able at this point with inventory to make some pretty broad decisions about, you know what, it's before this date. The lawsuit's only concerned with from here to here. Anything before this, I can just get rid of. And you can hack off big chunks of data in this data set just based on date. Or you might be able to hack off big chunks of data based on the email domain that you're seeing. So what it gives you is, I'm not going to go into the analogy. When I get done, I'll tell you about it. I'll help it. But go ahead.
Is the inventory on expanded size?
No.
Okay.
So again, inventory is just a way to give you a small insight into the data to let you maybe make some really rough cut sort of decisions about the data. What it says. So then once you've got that, you've decided, very much like collection, if you think about the interface in collection I talked about to be able to do the scout process and then build a targeted collection, a lot of the same things you could see then, you could see here. So you can make the case of, well, couldn't I have done that in collection? The answer is yes. Some people don't have collection. Some people have collection and not processing. So it's a lot of the same capabilities, kind of that high-level filtering, but you do have the ability here. So you remove what we consider junk at that point. Then you do the really hard work of processing called discovery or discover. And that is literally, and sometimes it'll be called cracking the files. That's when you're opening the files, you're expanding the files, you're finding out in inventory, I see an email and I know it's got 3 attachments. I have no idea what those attachments are or what they contain. I just know it's got attachments. Here you're now opening that email, you're opening the attachments, they have attachments to them. You're breaking them down in the doc. The amount of data that was on that little drive at the end, it starts to actually explode because you're expanding everything like that. That's the discover pass. That's the one that takes a long time. It takes a remarkably short time if you think about how long it used to take, but it's something that I think every release we talk about making processing faster. It's 12% faster to do this. It's 50% faster doing this. So it's always chasing it. And we're always chasing it because the data size keeps growing. So as fast as we can make it, it's still not big enough for the data, that the data sizes keep growing. So but at this point with Discover, I've identified all the files in my data set. I know everything about them in terms of the metadata, who, the what, the why, the when, the where. And all the text is extracted. One thing I want to point out here, because it's going to become relevant in the data grid discussion. If you think about a database, it handles certain things really well, like it handles date and name and time, short little snippets of information. That's what a database is great at. You get a 30-page contract, you get all those little snippets of data, and then you get 30 pages of text that we handle in the database like it was a name record. It just goes into a box in the database the way everything else does. Really stresses our database technology, Microsoft SQL Server. So this extracted text thing, but that is literally what you have to show the attorney to review it later. So you have to have it. But we've done an architectural change to address that. And publish is nothing more than we have the data extracted, we know everything about it. Publish is actually the pushing of it into Relativity so that documents are viewable in Relativity. All that data we've now collected and put in the database, now we kind of tell Relativity, here's what it is. Okay. So processing, I'm going to talk about the ECA thing in a minute, but to wrap up processing, and I'm running a little short on time, so I'm going to be really brief with this. When we first came out with processing, it was new for us, and we had these great little marketing stories about how you could take this attorney needs this PST file for this new custodian, and I'm going to lunch, and I wanted to review it after lunch, and we pop it in and, point and click, a couple of things, really simple interface like I talked about, and it would be ready. What the market interpreted from that is it's not a high-powered processing engine. It's sort of kind of a little cute toy, and I still need to keep my real processing engine around for that. The other thing that led to that was in the process of making it simple, we took away a lot of options. What people would tell us afterwards is, this is really simple. I love it. I can use it. people that never did processing jobs before can use it, but there's 10% of my cases that have weird, think of it like an airline cockpit. I've got dials and bells and whistles I need to set. We didn't expose those in that quick, easy interface, so that was a challenge. So we had to market around, look, our processing engine is as powerful as anybody else's. The fact that we made it simpler didn't make it less powerful or faster. So the engine itself is very powerful and industrial strength, if you want to think of it that way. We hit on the efficient and intuitive piece that users that couldn't do processing before can now do it, and the filtering down of the data into the ECA, what's called early case assessment, that I'll get to in a second. But the whole message around processing for us, the differentiator, you don't care about how fast discovery is. That's what everybody else wants to put the speedometer on. Look, we can discover this many files in this amount of time. We want to change that conversation. We've been very successful with this, saying to somebody, you don't really care about this one little step in this process. You care about, I've got raw data, and I got attorneys looking at it. All the crap that happens in here is inconsequential. How fast do you get from here to here? Stop measuring this. Measure this. So we talk about speed to review. That's what this review your data sooner message is. We don't have all this import-export stuff going on because it just stays inside of Relativity. We got a really compelling story about speed to review. Okay, ECA. This is brand new for us. We just released it in our last release in June. What it's about, early case assessment, it really does two things here. Early case assessment is designed to give you enough insight into your data that you can make some early decisions. Obvious one, not the only one, but I'll just throw it out for you. If I've got a litigation matter that says this employee was inappropriately communicating with this other company, and I do a quick, before I've even reviewed a document, I do a quick ECA, look at some charts and find out, are there any emails from this person to that company, and I see none, I'm a heck of a lot more likely to say, no, we're going to stand up and fight this thing, because the employee's telling me, I did not communicate with these guys. I see a bunch of email traffic between him and this other company, even though I haven't read any one of those emails, I might be more inclined to think about settling that case. So it's giving you some early indications of what maybe you would want to do, but more importantly, maybe it's giving you early indications about how you want to do your review. Like, I want to get this custodian stuff to my lead attorney as fast as I can. We're going to process his data first, some of that kind of things. So that's kind of the early case assessment, making some decisions about that. The investigation piece is more like an internal corporate story that I'm looking at being able to go from, decisions about kind of the ones I was talking about, but decisions that I can really quickly make that aren't necessarily even e-discovery related. Maybe I'm just investigating something for a compliance matter or something like that. Here's the way it works. So we've got all this data and we start to swallow it into Relativity. Now, remember I said publish? None of this data has been published to Relativity yet. Nobody's looking at a document here. This is just all that stuff I know about these documents at this point going in here, but I'm able to do filtering and sorting and keyword searching and all kinds of stuff like that. So I learn a lot about the documents via the way it can be structured here. I can do my analytics against this, find out which documents are related in the data set are related to each other and what's that concept that they're related about. I get a ton of information without having read a document yet. So that's what ECA gives you. And then what you want to do is include or exclude documents based on what you're learning. Look, that bubble of documents, there's no way that's going to be right. We can just get rid of it again. Again, reducing the number of documents you have to review. And then finally, you start making decisions. We call it promote, but essentially you're taking some sets of documents and pushing them into a Relativity workspace. What we've never been able to do is process data. When you process data, it was locked to, look, it's going to end up in this manner, in this workspace. If I've got my CTO's docs and he is in 3 different lawsuits, I can process his documents 3 different times. With ECA and investigation, I can now process his documents once and promote the right documents to each individual workspace. So it's a huge saver for that. Because, by the way, the way corporates refer to people like the CTO, in this case, is they're frequent flyers. These are the guys that get sued all the time. You have a technology issue, you're going to throw the CTO on that lawsuit, name him in the lawsuit, no matter what. So processing his documents over and over and over again is kind of wasteful. So this gives us the ability to process once and publish to multiple workspaces. You can also, God forbid, create a load file if you want to review it in some other product. We don't promote that a lot, but people ask the question. So ECA, there's two real stories. The early case assessment, you understand your data and maybe make some decisions about it. Maybe more importantly, you can organize and prioritize to set up for review. With investigation, you can look at things, explore the data really quickly, maybe make a decision based on what you find, but you can also share that data with some other people early on in the case. So it's about getting insight fast, deciding what level of risk you want to keep going here, and then reducing your costs. Data grid. I mentioned I was going to talk about this a little bit. It's an architectural change that we made. So you remember a few minutes ago I talked about some data that we slam into the SQL database fits really well. It's great, names, dates, that extracted text. What data grid is kind of a way to address the strain or the challenge we were putting into SQL with the amount of data that we were forcing in there. So data grid is based on NoSQL technology. If you're not a database person, don't worry about what that means, but if you are, it's NoSQL. It's really easy to run and set up. We actually can scale to much, much larger cases with this new technology. Less time administering it. There's some real-time searching and analytics capability you have. And then Relativity has always audited the crap out of what happens in Relativity. Who changed what, when they did it, who accessed it, who logged in. We track all that stuff. And we gave users virtually no way of looking at that data. You know, you could export it out into Excel, which some of them did, or into another business intelligence tool. But with Data Grid now, we built a whole audit interface on top of it. So you have much more insight into what's going on in your large environment. So here's the challenge we had with that extracted text. As your case sizes got bigger, first of all, you bought Relativity, you bought a SQL Server, paid for the SQL Server license you needed for that size server. And then your cases started to get bigger. So what I have to do, I have to basically throw that server out and buy a bigger one. I can't just like add to it. I have to buy a bigger one. And then the same thing happens again. This gets really, really expensive to scale a SQL environment. And the cost isn't all necessarily in software license and server price. How much longer does it take to back that up? How many more DBAs, database administrators, do I have to have on staff to manage an environment like this? SQL Server at scale like this is expensive to run. So what we've done is say, look, keep that same SQL Server because there's stuff that fits in SQL that we like. We're going to keep it there. But with Data Grid, it's an optional way for these larger environments to start adding capacity. And what you're doing is basically bolting together small commodity-priced servers. And as you need more, you just add more. And there's a little bit of an expense, not more. And maybe as big an advantage is I can spin them up for a while because I got a really big case. But maybe I don't always have a really big case. I can spin them back down. I'm not constantly paying for all that data. A couple of internal advantages here. There's high availability. So if one node here fails, the rest of it picks up the work. It's much easier to do backups and the database administration in this kind of an environment. So Data Grid is included with Relativity, and it is just a way for those larger environments to scale out in a much more inexpensive way. Higher thresholds means we can handle more data. Acting on the audit data, we gave you an interface now to actually look at all that crazy stuff that we're tracking, and you can understand more what's going on in your environment. And then instant searching. So we haven't gotten to analytics yet, but one of the things, analytics is so powerful and stuff, the way that you can get rid or identify documents that should be grouped together to one reviewer. It's called batching. You can do that so much more effectively with analytics. The price you pay for analytics is you have to get all the data in, and then you have to run the analytics index build. I don't know if you've ever like searched for a file in your Windows environment, and you'll see like a green bar. Well, it's basically indexing all your files, trying to find what's looking for. You can do that. Basically, what Relativity is doing in advance, understanding everything that it's got, and then it can run the analytics operations. What happens with Data Grid is as the file goes into Data Grid, we index it. And it just keeps building and building. Instead of one monolithic build after all the data is loaded, it builds as the data loads. That's what I think of it. So it allows you to start searching immediately. You don't have to wait for the whole data set to index. Attorneys can start working faster. Review. You would think, based on the fact this is still the huge bulk of our revenue, I'd spend a lot of time on here. This is probably going to be the quickest one we go through. It's where it got its start. This is, you guys have probably all gone through the Andrew discussion on this, but it started as a consulting project. It seemed like a good enough idea to build a company around, and here we are. So what's going on? What is an attorney, after we filter out all the documents, try to limit the amount of stuff he's got to look at, at the end of the day, you're going to have an attorney looking at documents. What are they looking at them to do? They're deciding whether they're responsive to the lawsuit. There's facts of the case. This side alleges this happened. I'm looking at the documents to see, is this an indicator that it either did or didn't happen? Is it relevant or responsive to that issue? Redactions. Redactions is, this is kind of your point. An attorney can go in and say, well, this document's responsive, but this whole paragraph is not, it's proprietary corporate information we will not share. That lawsuit I was involved in basically turned into a hunting ground for that other company to get our customer list. They started asking questions about, well, who did this document get shared with? You have to give us all the emails. And we're like, we'll tell you how many times it was shared, but we're not giving you who it was sent to. That's basically mining our customer list for prospects. So we could redact that stuff. Personally identifiable information, social security numbers, credit card numbers, all that kind of stuff is what the attorney's looking for there. They're also looking for things like, I can't sue KFC and get their 64 herbs and spices recipe or whatever. That's, Coke has their proprietary. You can't, all that stuff is considered privileged information and can't be shared or shouldn't be shared, should be redacted. Privileged communications, by the way, the first thing the outside counsel told me when I was involved in the lawsuit says that from here on out, if you're even thinking about this when you're writing an email, copy me. Because if you copy me on the communication, it's privileged. Even though it may not ever be, it just becomes something they cannot collect. So privileged communication is usually communication between the company or the custodians or the people involved in the lawsuit and the attorneys. Issue coding is important because this is sort of binary. It's responsive. It's either responsive to the lawsuit or not. But lawsuits are rarely one issue or one set of facts that you're dealing with. You might have a case that's in the financial services market where you've got some fraud involved. You've got some, proprietary information that was shared kind of stuff. So you can have, you can identify the particular issue that the document's responding to or is responsive to. And then the attorneys are also going through these documents and highlighting things and putting notes on them and saying, I think this might be important. Can we have the senior attorney look at this? Stuff like that. The interface that these guys live in, I'm going to go back to the screen in a second. This is what they basically see. The document comes up on the left. I'm deciding whether it's responsive, non-responsive, need somebody else to look at it, I can't tell, or is a technical issue that they may decide they want somebody to look at, whether it's they don't understand the technology involved or something like that. But issues, audit committee, contracts, price fixing. So here you might say this is responsive, and what Relativity can do, because it's so flexible, is if I check non-responsive, no, I don't have to check anything here, obviously. It's non-responsive. Why would I pick an issue? But if I pick responsive, I have to pick an issue. And then privilege designation, like is this privileged because attorney-client communication or attorney work product? I mean, if your attorney's writing up documents, taking notes about things, somehow that got collected, that's privileged information as well. But this is essentially the workflow. Read the document, make a decision, go to the next document. I'm oversimplifying incredibly, but that's what the review attorney is looking at. So tons of documents, hard to do all this stuff. The approach is to review. I can throw more reviewers at it. I can take more time, or I can be more efficient, and that's where analytics is going to come in a second. Those are my trade-offs. So we talk about review being fast and flexible. By the way, we are the market leader in review, bar none. More documents end up in Relativity for review than any other product. So it is our big stake, our big claim to fame, and we use that to expand out to these other areas and talk about the value of keeping the data in Relativity from time you collect it all the way through to the time you have to produce it for the court. And then the level of integration that we have with our data analytics, which I'll hit here in a second. Production real quick. Production is simply, I'm done reviewing. I've got all the documents that are potentially responsive to the lawsuit, and I got to turn them over to the other side, or I got to turn them over to the court. So I have to produce them. So it can be really complex. It seems pretty simple. What's a Bates number? This whole thing where it would increment 1, 2, 3, 4. That little device was made by Bates Manufacturing Company. That essentially has become how we number documents in lawsuit. Each document has to have an individual number. When I was in my deposition, he would slide a document in front of me, and it would have the Bates number at the bottom, and the person recording the deposition would say, "Could you read the Bates number on it?" So those are incredibly important, and they need to be unique. So there's rarely one production going from one side to the other. Inevitably, the one side countersues the other side, or another party gets involved, and you end up having not just the first production. In my case, we had the first production of my documents and one other person's, and guess what? We had email exchanges with other people in the company, which immediately led to requests to get their documents. And then they wanted more of my documents from another time frame. And then those Bates numbering sequences have to be adjusted, and you do things like, first 3 letters of my last name, HAM _ 0001.3.5, and so you can inject documents later in the process by doing the decimal numbering and things like that. But it can be a very complex process to do productions. So we talk about, and we just rebuilt, about a year ago, rebuilt our production application completely. It was very old. It was very hard to use for today's more complex productions. And people were keeping other products around in their environments simply due to productions. They would do everything else in Relativity, but they kept the license for some other product because our production engine was inferior. So we have fixed that. Analytics. This is complex stuff, how it actually works. So we're going to fly over this and understand in general what analytics provides. It's a suite of tools, guys. It's not like, okay, I'm going to run analytics. What you run is, based on this data set, what I'm trying to do, I definitely want to do email threading. I might do some clustering, and then I want to run similar document detection on this thing. These all do different things. There's a little bit of an explanation here on each of these. There's not a single common workflow. Do this, then that, then this. It's not the way it works. So there's more art than science here, like I said, to running an analytics project. Tremendous value, though, in terms of understanding your data set. All of the, most of the technology that underlies this was based on technology from a company called Content Analyst, which we did acquire last year, or maybe earlier this year. Can't remember when it closed. So if you hear people talking about a Reston office, Reston, Virginia, that's Content Analyst. They're now fully part of Kcura, and that technology that we were OEMing or renting or purchasing from them, we now own, and we control the roadmap on that, and they're doing all kinds of cool stuff to extend these things even farther. So these are the different kinds of analytics tools, and again, it's toolbox. It's not an end-to-end process. Sometimes you use all of it, sometimes you use none of it, sometimes you use pieces of it. And that's where the lit support professional who's setting up the project makes earns their money. I'll just throw this out there, there's still, even though this analytics usage for our customer base is going up tremendously, very successfully, there's still a lot of attorneys that are worried about using this stuff. And their general worry, to boil it down, is it's black magic that I don't understand, and the judge could ask me about it. It's not that they don't think it's right or they think it's broke or it's bad. It's just, damn, I don't want to be in front of the judge and he asks me how we do email threading. So they tend to stay away from it. And they'll hide behind, should have a human looking at every document. What the courts have already said is that this stuff is more accurate than a human. So anyway, so that's the big thing I wanted to leave you with analytics is it's a set of tools that can be applied different ways in different cases. The one I want to spend a little more time about, though, was assisted review. That's one you'll hear a lot about. You will hear assisted review from us. You'll hear predictive coding from Recommind. You'll hear technology assisted review, or TAR. You'll hear computer assisted review, or CAR. Relativity Assisted Review, or RAR. So everybody's got a different acronym, but essentially the products are all doing the same thing at a high level. You have a human look at some of the documents in the data set and make responsive, non-responsive decisions. And that can be a fairly small percentage, actually, of the total amount of documents. And then the system, you feed those to the system and tell it, based on these decisions, Relativity, go look at all the rest of the documents and tell me which ones you can make a decision on based on these. And that first round, it's usually pretty small. You can't make a ton of decisions on it. So you end up with something that looks like this, which is based on the small number of documents you gave me, I could decide that this percentage, this light blue, is non-responsive. I can filter those out. And I can't find any that are responsive, and I have 83% or whatever that number is that I don't have a clue. Based on what you told me, I can't make a decision. But then you go on and you give it more and more information each time, because what happens is you QC that round, you do a look at what decisions the system is making, and you basically confirm the decision, or you tell the system you're wrong, and you overturn it, and the system gets smarter. And you're reviewing a small percentage of the overall documents, and what you end up in is a project that starts to look like this, where, okay, I'm finding the responsive documents, so that seems to have settled out, and now this is all, this is pretty typical, by the way, in a data set, that you're not going to have like 80% of the documents are responsive. You're going to have a small subset, percentage-wise, that's responsive. But in this case, you can see we're above 95%, but we still have like 5% uncategorized we don't know about. You could have somebody go look at those 5, but the courts have said, you know, if you establish the ground rules for an assisted review case early on, and that's okay that your project stabilizes at that point, you don't have to look at every document. The way that an assisted review project is measured, there's two statistical like speedometers you look at. One is called precision, and that is it bringing back the right documents? The other one is recall. Did it bring back all of the right documents? And I'm not going to get into because I couldn't get into the statistical way those are calculated, but those are the generally accepted calculations. And we have reports that look like this. That'll say precision is at 95% or recall is at 92%. And you will have agreed with the other party that when the project gets to this point, continuing to thrash through it probably doesn't make a lot of sense. That those documents are likely not, they're probably not going to be relevant to the case anyway. So you don't have to, my point is, it's not realistic or necessary to drive this to 100% before you can say, okay, we're done. Yeah.
The uncategorized, are those aren't documents that don't have text, or or Excels, those are filtered out and not part of
if you've decided, if you filtered out for those reasons, they would have been already filtered out. This is based on what I know. I just can't make a decision. Yeah. Okay. So that's what assisted review is. The way we talk about analytics is the integration, how there's other analytics tools out there, but none of them are as well integrated with Relativity. Again, this kind of gets to the point about some of the attorneys are concerned about it, defensible workflows. If you guys go to, not even go to, but if you see any stuff about Relativity Fest, we had a judges panel for the last couple of years. It was one of the more prominent judges in this whole legal technology space that will repeat his mantra, which is, I tell all my attorneys, bring your geek to court. Says, it's fine, you don't know these answers. I expect you to know sort of why you did it and things like that, but if you need to get into that deep explanation because the other side's challenging it, bring your geek to court. You don't have to be the geek, but you're doing your client a disservice if you don't look at the technology that's available to do these things better. Because, by the way, if assisted review or analytics gets you through the case faster, how does an attorney bill by the hour? Does he have any incentive to make the case go faster? Wouldn't he rather spend forever looking at documents? For a while, that was the case. What's happened, though, is corporations got smarter. Because at the end of the day, this whole process, I usually say this early on, the whole process is corporate money being spent. It may pass through a law firm, it may pass through a legal service provider, but we're spending corporate America's money, corporate world's money. So it's not like saving the law firm. It's not about saving the law firm money. So the corporation said, wait a minute, you can't just I can't have an open-ended e-discovery project here. you got to tell me some idea of how long this is going to take. And that started to put the attorneys not only in a box, but also made them vulnerable to, if you can't give me like a fixed price for this, this other law firm over here can. So I'm going to take my business to them. So it became a competitive issue for these guys to not just have, sorry, e-discovery is going to take what it takes, and I'll tell you what it is when we're done, which is literally the way it used to happen. Two real quick tools, or we call them products, but they're free, and you can use them kind of at the end of the case. One is called Fact Manager. It's kind of a visual tool that lets you kind of work collaboratively, talking for 90 minutes, the mouth stops working, with the rest of your case team, and be able to lay out like a timeline of facts in the case. And you've got this one little, along the timeline, you've got this item here that says this is when the original, first meeting of the two parties was. It's a merger. This was the first meeting of the two parties. Here was the first draft of the contract, and you're tying those facts to documents that support those. And it might be, the smoking gun email that went between so-and-so. But Fact Manager is a really visual way of kind of telling your story. And you can share it with the rest of the case team or even bring it to court. The other one is our mobile approach. Anybody heard of Relativity Binders? Okay. Relativity Binders was our first mobile product. Very specific use case. End of the case, senior attorney who's going to go argue it in court or go to the deposition or whatever could take the relevant documents, which they told us were 30 to 50, on their iPad, have them there sort and filter and do all kinds of stuff, but it was in their little sandbox. It didn't really replicate back up to Relativity. We did store it in Relativity, so their changes got stored, but if he made all these annotations on a document and somebody went into regular Relativity and looked at that same document, those annotations weren't there. It was only in his little sandbox. So it had value, but what we found is people were telling us, we want, first of all, more documents. This is a very similar story to the method where we put it out there and then learned stuff. So what did we learn? We put binders out there and learned that they woefully underestimated 30 to 50 documents. We started immediately getting requests for thousands and tens of thousands of documents. So the idea that this is going to be a small data set got blown up. The other one was security. The attorney would tell us, I'm not worried about that. It's, I got to log into the application. I have to log onto the iPad. That seems okay. We were fine with that until we started deploying it, and the IT people started going, you can't do this. It's not even close to secure enough. And we're like, but they were saying, so let me tell you, they're basing it on, if they lose their paper documents, it's on them. If they, meaning the attorneys, lose electronic documents, it's on me. So here's how it's going to happen. At this, we have to integrate with document or mobile device management, so I can wipe the device remotely. I can expire binders. I can bunch of stuff that we learned. Okay, if we're actually going to deploy this through the IT organization, the attorney's requirements and security and his requirements are radically different. The Relativity Mobile is evolving into a little more full-featured version of Relativity. We're basically going to provide in the next iteration, and it will be renamed. It won't come out as binders. The number one feature that people said that they want was the number one thing they said they didn't want when we did our initial interviews. They want to be able to code documents. We always said, look, Relativity Binders is not, you're not going to want to code documents on an 11-inch screen. You got your 27-inch monitor back there. You got your laptop. That's full. You can put an iPad is the wrong tool for that job. And they said that you're right, don't do it. And then as they got it and had it, they realized, man, I really want to do that on this. I'm not going to do my full, 1,000 or 10,000 or 1,000,000 documents on an iPad. But when I get 10 or 15 that the case team says, look, we really don't know. These just got kicked out of the review process as needs, somebody senior to look at them, be able to batch those together and give them to that attorney and have him make those decisions on that iPad became a real use case for them. So Binders is evolving into something for right now we're calling Relativity Mobile. It will not be full-blown Relativity, but it will be more of the common workflows that attorneys have without giving them all the crazy stuff. Okay. Who's heard of Relativity 1? Good. Who's heard of coffee? Okay, you guys know the story. We used to talk about who was caffeinated around, because certain people knew about the project before it became public. So you refer to as caffeinated or not caffeinated if you knew or didn't know. Relativity One is the brand for that software as a service product. Just a couple of quick things I want you guys to know. First of all, Relativity One is everything you just saw. It encompasses all that work, analytics and processing and legal. All that is part of Relativity One. You can have access to all of that if you're a Relativity One customer. So all the features, all the stuff that we kind of tout, the advanced analytics, how fast we can get data in, flexible ingestion capabilities is basically processing. You're ingesting data into Relativity. All the security that we normally have, all the complexes. So this slide is designed to just drive home the point that Relativity One is not a neutered version of Relativity. It's not Relativity Light. It's Relativity running in a different environment. There are some unique features to it, though. I kind of talked about the fact that it's the whole stack here when you purchase Relativity One. These other ones, this consolidated workspace portal. So if I'm a customer that has some cases on-premise or local, and I have some up in the cloud, up in the Relativity One space, I want to be able to look at all my cases and not have to toggle between, like I'm looking for Jones versus Smith, and I can't remember, is that one I have in Relativity One, or is that one I have? One place to look at all my cases, and it'll tell you, you can navigate to it no matter where it is. So that consolidated workspace portal. File transfer app, something that we didn't have to deal with before, but we do with the cloud-based things. How do we get data up into the cloud and out of the cloud if necessary? So we're building a very use case specific data transfer tool that will be optimized to get lots of data in and out of the cloud. The ability to work to migrate an on-prem workspace and say, you know what, I want to host this in the cloud. I want to move this one up to the cloud. Or vice versa. It's been in the cloud. I want to put it on-prem. So this ARM stands for Archive, Restore, or Move. So it's our utility within Relativity to move these cases around. Usually it would be within the on-prem environment, but now we're talking about expanding the capability of ARM to be able to deal with moving it to the cloud or not. And then Office 365 integration. Because the Office 365 data is already in a cloud-based world, we've got some ability to do a tighter integration with those Office 365 documents with Relativity One. That will actually be a feature that, how is all this licensed to end users? I'm licensed for, so let's see. There's other things that are, like when we were selling DataGrid, it was more consumption-based. Processing is sort of limited on, you buy a number of worker servers, so it's like how many nodes of processing you have. So it kind of varies from product to product a little bit. Legal hold is one price, and you can do as much of it as you want. So it does vary. There's not one price, even when we're quoting. I shouldn't say, when sales quotes a deal that has multiple products in it, they may net it all out down to one price and not break it all out individually, but the reality is each product has its own pricing model. Good. Thanks, guys. And if you have questions afterwards, feel free, again, Bill Hammond, I'm in the book, so feel free to ping me with a question about it if it comes up later. All right? Thanks.
Thank you.